Hi, my name's Lizzie Karen, and welcome to the channel I've created on my dreams of Atlantis. This episode is the fifth in a series about the stonework of the ancients. So this time we're going to be looking at massive monster machines of the ancients. These are the machines that made the buildings that are of hewn stone. So those are the buildings that are just basically cut out of rock. So you take a big boulder and you carve it out until it's a building. So that's what I mean about hewn stone. So in this episode, I'm going to describe the three most monstrous machines that I remember from my dream regressions. Now, there are a lot of other machines, but these three, they stand out because, well, they were the size of buildings themselves. And I will use some examples of real-world places that have the same look as the places in my dreams. And I'm trying to find as many places that match my dreams as I can. But some of the pictures that I include, it's only because they look similar to the one in my dreams. And I get most of my photos and videos, etc., from the app that I'm using called Canva. But let's start with the three massive monster machines used for cutting, drilling, tunneling, and carving stone and bedrock. The machines were created by Uran, who was the first leader in my regression history. It was he who would build Tantal, otherwise known as Atlantis. He did this before becoming the leader. He created the machines, and the ones that he created were what you'd call early versions of the monsters that I'm going to talk about today. And he used them to carve out the canals and the tunnels and the buildings, etc., of Tantal, or Atlantis. So the machines were called, well, they each had a name. The first one was called Cotier, which kind of made me giggle when I was a kid because it sounds so much like Cartier. But yeah, anyway, that's by the by. The second one is called Ogier, and the last one is called Aigier. And so those are the three machines. So there was Cotier, Ogier, and Aigier. Cotier and Ogier were very similar, but Aigier was a bit different because it operated underwater. So they all essentially worked the same way and used the same technology, which was through vibration. But the one that worked underwater looked a little bit different and had a few slightly different parts to it, but essentially they were all the same sort of machines. I'm going to focus on just one of them because the other two are pretty much the same. So the one I'm going to concentrate on is called Ogier. And this machine can scoop and carve at a speed and accuracy which is absolutely fabulous. So what does this machine look like? Well, let's start with the fact that it starts off looking like a box, just a regular, everyday, massive box of 2 stories high and almost as wide, metallic, and, well, it doesn't bounce up and down at all. No, it's more like just a metal box, but a really, really, really big metal box. So now in the picture, we've got approximately the right person to monster dimensions, relative dimension, I should say. And you can see that it's a big metal box. So as I mentioned before, it starts off at about 2 stories high. Now I say starts off because as the things that do the work come out of it, it kind of gets taller and wider, and yeah, so it's when it's active, it's bigger. In my dream regressions, I'm operating one of these beauties from relatively nearby, not too close, but not too far away. I can see everything it's doing quite clearly. And I'm giving it instructions using a flat screen. Now, this looks a little bit like an iPad, but it's like one piece of smoky white crystal. And I do wonder sometimes if some of the things from the real world kind of seep into my dream world, because it's just uncomfortably like an iPad. Not that I use an iPad, I just use my iPhone, but this device, it's just got that same feel about it as an iPad. Once it starts working, the first thing that happens is the top opens up and what looks like a round ball on a stalk comes out. It kind of looks like a cross between a head and an eyeball. And then another one comes out, and another one, and another one, and another one. And there's just heaps of these round things on stalks, and they can move around quite freely. They can go up, they can go sideways, they can fan out. So it gives the machine a wide range of viewing and measuring capability. I'll come back to how the eyeballs are used shortly, but right now I'll just continue on with the description. The next thing to pop out of the machine looks like an arm with an ice cream scoop on the end of it. And then another one will pop out, and another one, and another one. Now, clearly my diagrams are lacking because the ice cream scoop should be attached to the machine. So they should be appearing out of the machine, but my diagram doesn't show that. But when we rectify that by showing the various scoops attached to the machine, suddenly it looks very cluttered. So I thought I'd show you the arms and the scoops before I attached them. So what we've got is a mechanical arm with ice cream scoop hands, but all these different hands are a different size. So they're ranging from massive ice cream scoops down to tiny, weeny little ones. So let's talk about why I call them, or I say that they look like ice cream scoops. It's not only because they look like ice cream scoops, but also because they work like ice cream scoops as well. So when they're actually operating, it seriously looks like an ice cream scoop going through ice cream. And that's because the technology is using a form of vibrational frequency, which as it touches the rock, it makes it so that the machine can just go through it. And yeah, I just can't quite describe it. So it looks like there's a heap of these ice cream scoops, and they're all sizes, as I said, and they come out of the body of the machine as they are required. So they start scooping large scoops to get the shape right, and then small scoops, and then there's the flat-looking tools as well, used for creating and making a surface really flat. But it really is just a series of tiny little scoops that are so small that their scooping is too small to see. And the smaller the scoop, the greater the detail of the carving, and the smoother the results. Just as an aside, I imagine that if the ancient Egyptians stumbled across one of these things, they would just think it was a very large metal block. And they would probably put some inscriptions on it and dedicate it to some god or some pharaoh. And yeah, that's what I think. Anyway, that's just an aside. So now I'm going to show you some pictures of places where I think that these machines could have been used because they have the right look about them. So I'm going to take you first to the unfinished obelisk in Egypt. I'm sure you all know the size of these great big pieces of stone, but look at the way they're scooped. Look at on the body of it. You can see literal scoop marks from where the machine has been removing the rock. Now, obviously, they stopped doing this before they used the tool that makes it nice and flat. But when you look down the side in particular, the machine was able to just reach in because of the extended length of the arms of the device. So it could just reach into very, very small areas and scoop out the rock. And it was operating to very precise measurements. So it could do exactly what it was required to do. And you can actually see in this particular photo an area which has been flattened and the scooping marks have been removed. And if you go underneath this object, you'll see more scooping marks. And it's really, really hard to imagine how they got into these very, very tiny areas if they were just using the hitting it with a rock method. I don't doubt that it could be done that way, but I do doubt that it would leave these sorts of impressions, and I would also doubt that anyone would be bothered to put in that much effort for so little result. Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine how long it would take them to actually carve something like this out. And it's not just Egypt that's got things like this. Let's move on to Baalbek in Lebanon. There's some amazing sized things there that you just cannot begin to imagine them creating using copper chisels and hitting things with another rock. I look at it that way because in my dream regressions, I've seen it done in such an easy and straightforward way that to me, it just seems hard to believe. Back onto the subject of the magnificent machine, there was so much more that they could do, but I'll leave you to use your imagination on that. But the picture that you're looking at now is the ceiling of one of the caves, or one of the buildings, I should say, in Petra. This is a close-up, well, relatively close, and you can see the handiwork of this type of machine that I've been talking about. And another picture here from Petra at the front of one of the buildings, showing how flat and smooth the end result can actually be. Now let's move to some ceilings in some other caves. These ones are in India, I think, and it's just the sort of thing that these machines would be carving out. I can't say if this was done by one of these wonderful machines, but it's just the sort of thing that the machine would in fact do. I'm showing you these ones from India with the intricate designs on them because of how complex it is to carve such a thing in rock, in solid rock. So remember, these pictures that I'm showing you now are of caves, real caves. And the design and the beauty and the intricacy of these places is the sort of thing that in my dream regressions we took absolute joy from designing and getting the machines to create these wonderful masterpieces. These are just so typical of the sorts of things that I've actually done in my dream regressions, and it was so much fun. It's just so hard to describe how enjoyable it is to create something like this. I could just keep going for ages, finding examples from around the world that look like the sort of work that we did in my dream regressions. But I think the most important thing now is to actually give you a feel for how the work was actually done, so that now that you can see the sort of work that we did, you might be thinking, well, how was it done? So I will start by describing the work that, as a person, I was doing, not what the machine was doing. I think you've got a fair description of what the machine does. So now I'm going to take you actually into one of my dreams. So this dream is actually from a time when I was a student, learning how to do all this stuff and being introduced to handling the planning side, because the planning was probably the most important aspect of the whole thing. So the first step was to use a series of lasers, or at least I think they were lasers, to measure out the specifics of the area to be carved. And I bet you've already guessed what part of the machine was doing that, those head-like eyeball things. So they would work out the exact specifics of the area, and you're able to use that as a kind of baseline on which to do your design. In this particular dream, I don't actually see the machine being put in place, but in other dreams I do. So inbuilt into the machine is actually the levitation principle, so that it can be raised up and actually moved easily from where you've had it in storage to where you're actually going to be doing the work. But that wasn't actually in this dream. So I just thought I better just pop that in there, because you might be wondering, how did they get the machine there in the first place? So you've got your baseline. So what you have to do is use that with the crystal tablet to actually do your design. Now the language and everything, it all looks weird in my dreams, but it's symbols and colours and lines, and you just seem to fiddle with it. And I'm making a mess of describing this, but it's just so hard to describe. But anyway, the end result is you come up with a design, and that's on your crystal tablet. And when you come to do your actual work, you get the machine set up, as I mentioned before, and you start to apply the scooping principles based on your design. So you tell the machine to follow certain steps, and basically you could just leave it to it. But that didn't tend to be the case. People stayed with the machine as it was doing all this. You'd imagine that this would cause one awful mess, bits of rock and dust and rubbish everywhere. But that actually wasn't the case. What happened was that as the vibration touched the rock, it somehow managed to powder it. I can't quite describe, but the machine had incorporated into that scooping little arm thing a suction, and it would pull into the machine the leftover rock, and most of the bits of debris just went straight into the machine. There was very little dust that was left over. So the dust and residue would go into the machine, and along the way, as enough of this stuff got gathered up, out from around the back of the machine would come a reconstructed block. And the block that came out was dependent on what the settings were that you asked it to manufacture. And then at the back of the machine, awaiting, were pallets for these blocks to drop onto. And the pallet was basically levitating, and when the blocks, we're talking about big blocks here, by the way, really big blocks, when they went onto the pallet, then that block was then available to be taken away and another pallet put in its place for when the machine was creating another one of these great blocks, manufactured blocks. So in this particular dream, I've been working on an area that looks very much like Petra. In fact, it stunned me the first time I saw photos of Petra, because I really felt that I had been party to that beautiful place. So just to summarize, so the scooping and carving machines that we had used kind of vibratory technology to make it easier to scoop out specific areas, and that same technology was used for slicing rock, which I discussed in the previous episode, and it was very similar technology when we were cutting shafts straight down into the bedrock. Different type of machine, but it was very similar technology, and similar technology also for core drilling. Also, it's sort of a little bit different because there were two separate parts to it. But maybe I should do an episode just covering off the little the examples like the core drilling and the shafts, because there's just a few variations on how they can work. If you are interested in me just addressing some of these little odds and ends like that, let me know in the comments below, and I will do another episode on that. We've still got the carving of giant statues to discuss, but that's in a future episode as well. So there's still plenty more for me to tell you about in more episodes on stonework. I keep thinking about all these other little tiny things that I could be telling you about, but this episode is going to get so long if I do that. So I think I better end the episode here, and we will return to some of these aspects of stonework at a later date. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye.